My parents forced me to take my sister's baby. Her graduation stunt backfired. Publicly, prologue, what my grandmother kept on her windowsill. My grandmother, Nana Bet, kept a small ceramic sparrow on her kitchen windowsill for 40 years. She'd bought it herself at a church sale when she was 22, newly arrived in Cleveland from rural Georgia with nothing but a cardboard suitcase and a scholarship letter she'd earned entirely on her own. She told me once, when I was about 9 years old and sitting at her formica table eating a bowl of grits, that the sparrow reminded her of a truth she'd had to learn the hard way. "Celeste," she said, pushing her reading glasses up her nose, "a bird that lets somebody else build its nest will never know which branch to come home to." I was 9. I thought she meant actual birds. I said something like, "That's sad for the bird," and she laughed so hard her coffee shook. I didn't understand what she meant until I was 29 years old, standing in the parking lot of my parents' house in Columbus with a diaper bag on my shoulder, a 7-week-old baby girl on my hip, a full-time job as a labor and delivery nurse at St. Matthias Medical Center, and a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment I was trying not to lose. That was the night I finally understood the sparrow. This is the story of how I got there, and how I found my way back out. Chapter 1. The Arrangement. Nobody asked me about my parents. Lorraine and Gerald Whitmore had 2 daughters. My sister Petra was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, she occupied a different category of existence in our household. It wasn't that my parents were cruel to me. They were not. They were warm and engaged and present in many of the ordinary ways. They came to school plays. They drove me to track practice. My father taught me to change a tire. But when it came to the arithmetic of sacrifice, whose plans bent, whose future yielded, whose inconvenience was treated as a minor footnote, the answer was almost always mine. Petra was the artistic one, the spirited one, the one whose moods were monitored for fragility. I was the dependable one, which, in the language of our household, translated roughly to the one we don't have to worry about. Being low maintenance was treated as its own reward. I was never told I was loved less. I was simply loved last, in the way that a song's bridge is always played after the chorus. Technically part of the same song, but not the part anyone hums. I put myself through nursing school at Ohio State on a combination of academic scholarships, Pell Grants, and weekend shifts at a Panera Bread. My parents contributed $1,100 over 4 years. I know the exact number because I kept every financial record related to my education in a manila folder in my desk drawer, not out of bitterness at the time, just out of habit. I was the kind of person who kept records. My parents sometimes said this made me rigid. I thought of it as having a good memory. Petra dropped out of Columbus College of Art and Design after 1 semester, enrolled again 2 years later, dropped out again. She worked intermittently at a boutique downtown, lived at home twice in her 20s, and was generally understood by the family to be finding herself, a process that seemed to require significant financial and logistical support from everyone around her. I never resented Petra for being Petra. She wasn't calculating about it. She was impulsive and bright and genuinely funny, and when we were alone together without our parents' framing casting its shadow, I actually liked her. She made me laugh. She could read a room better than anyone I knew. She just also happened to be someone to whom consequences had never quite arrived on schedule. So when Petra, at 25, found herself pregnant by a man named Donovan Reese, a perfectly affable 30-year-old with a landscaping business, and what my mother called commitment issues, the family mobilized around her the way it always had. The mobilization, I would discover in November of that year, included me. Chapter 2. What They Decided Over Dinner. I found out about the arrangement the same way I found out about most decisions that affected my life in that family. After the fact, at a dinner table, framed as something that had already been agreed upon. It was a Sunday in early November. I drove down from Columbus to my parents' house in Westerville for what my mother had described on the phone as a family check-in about Petra's situation. I brought a casserole dish and a good attitude. Petra was 7 months pregnant, still living at home, and Donovan had recently moved to Charlotte for a contract job that everyone was treating with careful optimism. My mother had made pot roast. My father said grace. Petra sat across from me in an oversized university sweatshirt, her hair in a bun, looking more like a teenager than a woman about to become a mother. She was picking at her carrots and not quite meeting my eyes. My mother, Lorraine, set her fork down about 20 minutes into the meal with the particular deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed a conversation. "We've been thinking," she began, and those 3 words from my mother's mouth had historically preceded some of the most consequential sentences of my life, about what the plan should be after the baby comes. The plan, as it turned out, had several components. Petra had re-enrolled at Columbus College of Art and Design. She was registered for the spring semester, starting in January, 6 weeks after her due date. The baby's due date was December 19th. The spring semester began on January 27th. Someone would need to care for the baby during Petra's class hours. Donovan would be back in Columbus by the summer, according to Petra, though this was said with the vague hopefulness of someone forecasting good weather 3 months out. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. "You're right there in Columbus, baby. You're at the hospital, you know babies. You've got that second bedroom." "That's my office," I said. "It's barely an office, you've got a daybed in there." "Mom, just until Petra gets settled." My father's voice was measured, the way it always was when he'd decided something and was presenting it as a conversation. "She's going to need a village." I looked at Petra. She was looking at her carrots. "Petra," I said, "did you ask me this?" A pause. "Mom said you'd be fine with it." The table was quiet in the way that family tables get quiet when the thing that's actually being said is too large to fit into the room politely. I took a breath. I thought about the casserole I'd driven 40 minutes to bring. I thought about my schedule at St. Matthias, 3 12-hour shifts a week, 2 of them overnight, plus the continuing education credits I was completing toward my certification in perinatal nursing. "I'm going to need to think about it," I said. My mother's expression shifted into something that was half hurt, half brisk practicality, a look she had perfected over decades. "There isn't a lot of time to think, Celeste. The baby comes in 6 weeks. Which is why you should have talked to me 6 weeks ago." Nobody answered that. Chapter 3. How I Became a Mother. Without becoming a mother. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I want to be honest about that, because the easier version of this story would cast me as someone who was coerced entirely against my will, and the truth is more complicated. I said yes because I was genuinely worried about Petra, because I loved the idea of the baby even before she arrived, because my parents' certainty that I would handle it created in me, as it always had, a corresponding pressure to confirm that certainty. I also said yes because I was tired after a long drive home in November rain, and saying no required more energy than I had saved up. My niece, Imani Rose Reese, was born on December 22nd, 3 days past the due date, in a labor that I partly attended as Petra's support person, still in my scrubs from a morning shift, holding her hand and talking her through contractions while Donovan video called from Charlotte. She was perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair, eyes that couldn't decide between brown and black. When they laid her on Petra's chest, and Petra looked down at her with an expression I'd never seen on my sister's face before, something raw and awestruck and newly afraid, I understood why our parents had built their entire plan around keeping Petra functional. There was no toughness in Petra in that moment. She was 25 years old, and she had just done the hardest thing she'd ever done, and she was looking at this baby like someone had handed her a lit flare in a dark room, grateful for the light, terrified of the burn. I drove back to my apartment that night and lay awake rearranging the second bedroom in my head. By January 15th, Petra and Imani had moved into my apartment. My daybed became a pack and play. My desk went into my bedroom closet. My sleep schedule, already fractured by night shifts, collapsed entirely. I was nursing in the hospital, and nursing adjacent, at home, waking at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. to heat bottles while Petra slept, because Petra needed her rest for school, because school was the plan, because the plan required someone to absorb its friction. That someone was me. I want to say I resented it from the start, but the truth is that for the first month, I loved it in a complicated, bone-tired way. Imani was singular. She recognized my voice by her 3rd week. She'd stop crying when I held her at an angle she liked, her cheek against my collarbone. I'd stand at the kitchen window in the dark of 4 a.m. and sway with her and watch the parking lot lights and feel something that was equal parts exhaustion and ferocious tenderness. I was building someone else's nest. I just hadn't done the arithmetic yet. Chapter 4. Donovan and the Summer That Didn't Come by March. Donovan was not coming in the summer. He had extended his contract in Charlotte and then extended it again. He video called Imani on weekends, sent money sporadically and not enough, and communicated with Petra in a way that seemed to leave her simultaneously hopeful and diminished. I watched my sister check her phone at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday with the particular expression of someone waiting for a tide that keeps not coming in. I didn't dislike Donovan. He wasn't malicious. He was the kind of person who meant well in a general, diffuse way that never quite concentrated into specific action. He loved Imani in the abstract and struggled to make that love structural. He and Petra were, as Nana Betta might have said, two birds waiting for each other to bring the twigs. My parents drove up to Columbus most Sundays. They would coo over Imani, bring food, praise Petra's fortitude in returning to school, and express a warm, vague gratitude toward me that felt like being thanked for doing the dishes at someone else's dinner party. My mother once referred to the arrangement as Celeste helping out, which was the linguistic equivalent of calling Niagara Falls a water feature. I was not helping out. I was providing primary child care for a 7-week-old infant while working 36 hours a week as a nurse and completing a professional certification. I was paying my rent, plus the increased utilities. I had arranged my entire shift schedule around Petra's class times, trading days with colleagues who eventually stopped finding my requests charming. I kept a simple log in a notes file on my phone. Not because I planned to use it. I was still, at that point, operating on the family's implicit understanding that this was temporary and reciprocal, and would somehow balance out. I kept the log because I was the kind of person who kept records. Old habit. In April, Petra started going out on Friday nights. At first it was a study group. Then it was, I need to decompress, Celeste. I'm a full-time student and a new mom. Both of these things were true, and I didn't begrudge her the decompression. What I began to begrudge was the way the edges of the arrangement kept moving outward. A Saturday night here, a Sunday morning sleep-in there, and the way my parents, when I mentioned it carefully and once, told me I needed to be more patient with Petra, because she's been through a lot. I let that sit for a moment, and then said quietly, "So have I." My mother looked at me the way she sometimes did, with a kind of fond bewilderment, as if I'd said something in a language she almost spoke. "But you handle things, Celeste. You always have." There it was, folded into a compliment like a stone in a sock. You handle things, so things will keep being handed to you. Chapter 5. The certification, the raise, and what I kept to myself. In May, I passed my inpatient obstetric nursing certification examination on the first attempt. It was the exam I'd been working toward for 2 years, and passing it came with a salary increase of $8,000 annually, and a transition to a senior clinical nurse role at St. Matthias. It also brought an offer from the nursing director, Cheryl Boateng, of a position on the newly formed perinatal quality team, a committee role that came with reduced bedside hours and increased responsibility, and the kind of professional trajectory I had been quietly, carefully building since my second year on the floor. I went home after the shift, where Cheryl told me about the offer, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 11 minutes before going upstairs. Petra was in the kitchen making pasta, Imani in the bouncy seat on the counter, both of them fine and ordinary, and part of a life that had folded itself around me so completely that I'd nearly stopped distinguishing between my plans and theirs. "Good day?" Petra asked. "Pretty good," I said. I didn't tell her about the certification. I didn't tell my parents. I put the paperwork in my desk drawer, my desk that was now in my bedroom, in the same manila folder where I kept the records of my nursing school finances. I wasn't sure why I kept it to myself at first, and then gradually I understood. I had never, in my family, received good news without that news being used to justify giving me less. "You're doing so well, Celeste. You handle things so well. You don't need as much. The sparrow on Nana Bet's windowsill. The branch you never learned to find." I accepted the committee position. I arranged my schedule. I told Petra the schedule was shifting. I did not say why. Chapter 6. The graduation announcement. The email came on a Thursday morning in June, a group email sent by my mother to a list of about 30 people, including extended family members, 2 of my parents' church friends, my Aunt Delphine, and several of Petra's friends whose email addresses I didn't recognize. The subject line was Petra's graduation celebration. Save the date, August 10th. Petra had completed enough credits to graduate from Columbus College of Art and Design in August, a summer commencement. She had managed to compress a full semester into the abbreviated summer term, which was genuinely impressive, and I felt real pride about it. I did. That part was not complicated. What was complicated was the rest of the email. My mother had planned a graduation party at my parents' house, a catered afternoon event, roughly 60 guests, a photo display of Petra's artwork. This part was fine. She had arranged for Petra to give a short speech. Also fine. She had coordinated with Petra's professors, one of whom was planning to attend. Fine. The last paragraph was where my throat closed. Petra has worked so hard this year, especially as a new mother. We are so grateful for the support of everyone in her village, particularly her sister Celeste, who opened her home to Petra and baby Imani, and has been a second mother to that little girl. The celebration will feature a special tribute to Petra's journey. We will be sharing a photo and video presentation of Petra's year, including beautiful moments of Petra and Imani together in Celeste's home. We are also so proud to announce that Petra will be using a portion of her graduation gift fund to establish her own studio space, a dream she has worked toward through everything. I read the email twice. Then I read it a third time. A photo and video presentation of Petra's year. The photos and videos, I now understood, that my mother had been quietly collecting from me over the past 7 months. The ones I'd texted her late at night, because she asked how Imani was doing. The 3 a.m. photos of Imani asleep on my chest. The ones where I was barely visible, just a pair of arms, a piece of shoulder, because I was always the one holding the camera. A tribute to Petra's journey. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and expectant. "Did you get the email?" "I did," I said. "I thought you'd love the tribute idea. You've done so much. Mom!" I kept my voice even. "Whose apartment do Petra and Imani live in?" "Yours, but..." "Who has been doing the night wakings?" A pause. "Celeste, it's not a competition." "I'm not competing. I'm asking." "You're being..." She searched for the word. "Prickly. You always get prickly when Petra has something nice." I sat with that. I looked at my kitchen, which had a bouncy seat and a drying rack of bottle nipples, and a baby gate I'd installed on the counter cabinet where I kept my cleaning supplies. I thought about the log on my phone, which by this point had over 4 months of entries. "The graduation is on August 10th, I said. "Where is Imani during the graduation ceremony?" "Well, that's one of the things." A brief sound almost like a breath of relief, as if I'd asked the question she was hoping I'd ask. "We thought, since the ceremony is at noon and Petra will need to focus, and you're so good with her, you'd take Imani to the ceremony. You could sit in the family section. We've got you a ticket." One ticket. Not a name in the program. Not a mention in any of the formal acknowledgments. A single ticket and a baby on my hip. "I'll be there," I said. I hung up and texted my colleague Ren, who owed me a shift trade and had been asking how things were going for months. Then I called my friend Marcus, who happened to be a paralegal and happened to have strong feelings about undocumented childcare arrangements, and we had a very long and clarifying conversation. Then I opened the notes file on my phone and started a second document. Chapter 7. What I put in place. I want to be precise about what I did over the next 6 weeks, because I think precision matters when people assume revenge is involved. It wasn't revenge. It was documentation and preparation. The same instinct that made me keep the manila folder, keep the nursing finance records, keep every relevant receipt since my college years. I was simply applying, systematically, the same rigor to my current situation that I'd always applied to my professional life. Marcus helped me understand several things. First, that I had no legal obligation to provide childcare, and that the informal arrangement I'd entered into had no standing. A fact that cut both ways, since it also meant I was wholly unprotected and uncompensated. Second, that Donovan Reese, as Imani's legal father, had responsibilities that were currently being comprehensively avoided, and that this was documentable. Third, that if the arrangement continued and I wanted out, really wanted out, cleanly and with my own future intact, I would need to give Petra notice and resources, not just announce it. I did not plan to abandon Imani. I want to be clear about that above everything else. That was never a thought I entertained. I would not leave a 7-month-old without a plan. What I did was this. I booked an appointment with a family law attorney named Harriet Voss, who had an office on Broad Street and a calm, precise manner that reminded me of my nursing director. I brought the log, the financial records, and a quiet Tuesday morning. Harriet walked me through my options with the brisk compassion of someone who had seen this particular shape of family pressure many times before. I also had a conversation with Petra. It was a Sunday, after my parents had come and gone, after Imani was asleep. I sat down at my own kitchen table, and I told my sister 3 things clearly. 1. I loved her, and I loved Imani. 2. The current arrangement was not sustainable for me past September. 3. I needed her to begin making a plan, a real, specific plan with a timeline, for Imani's primary care, whether that meant a licensed daycare, Donovan stepping up, our parents formalizing their involvement, or some combination. Petra looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Is this because of the party?" "It's because of 7 months," I said. "The party just made me stop pretending I wasn't counting." She cried. I handed her a tissue, from a box I'd purchased on a counter I'd paid for. I didn't feel cruel. I felt honest, which was a different sensation entirely. I also, very quietly, requested to speak at the graduation party. Chapter 8, August 10th. The ceremony was held in a pavilion on the college's campus, a bright August morning with a sky the color of new copper. I sat in the family section with Imani on my lap. She was 8 months old by then, alert and busy, interested in the light through the tent canopy, grabbing at my lanyard. She was wearing a white eyelet dress that I had picked out and paid for and washed twice to soften. Petra walked across the stage in her cap and gown, and she looked beautiful, and I cheered for her genuinely, and Imani waved both arms at the sound of my voice, the way she always did. We drove to my parents' house in Westerville afterward. The yard was strung with lights. The catering company was setting up. My Aunt Delphine was already there with a potato salad and her reading glasses. 60 people arrived over the course of the afternoon. My mother had prepared the video presentation. It ran on a laptop connected to a projector screen set up against the garage door. About 8 minutes of photos and short clips, the year in Petra's life, her at school, her art, the baby, mostly in Petra's arms or in my apartment, the background of which I could identify by the curtains I'd chosen and the rug I'd bought. My arms appeared in several photos, my shoulder, the back of my head. I appeared actually in frame and recognizable in 2 photos. Both were candid, blurred, caught in the background of what was clearly meant to be a photo of Petra and Imani. I watched people watch the presentation. I watched them smile. I watched them look at Petra, who stood beside the screen with her graduation sash still on, getting congratulated and hugged by professors and friends and church ladies, Imani now on my hip because the baby had reached her limit and wanted the person she trusted most. After the presentation, my father tapped his glass and invited Petra to speak. Petra's speech was good. It was genuinely good, funny and grateful and specific. She talked about perseverance and her art professors and her friends. She talked about Donovan with a careful restraint that suggested private complexity. She talked about my parents with real warmth. Then she held her hands out for Imani, which I gave her, and she held the baby up a little and said, "And I couldn't have done any of this without my sister Celeste, who took such good care of Imani while I was in class. I am so grateful." Then she said, "Thank you, everyone," and people applauded. Took such good care of Imani while I was in class. A nanny's reference, a fond dismissal, a thank you for services rendered, the way you thank a dog walker. My father said, "We have one more speaker." He looked at me across the yard with an expression that was 50% paternal love and 50% unease, because I had asked to speak, and he didn't know what I was going to say, and he was a man who liked to know. I handed my phone to Marcus, who was there because I had invited him as my +1. I walked to the front. Chapter 9. The speech I had written and rewritten. I want to walk you through what I said and what I chose not to say, because both mattered. I did not say, "I have been functioning as Imani's primary caregiver for 8 months." I did not itemize expenses. I did not read from the log on my phone. I did not cry, which some people might have expected. I said this: I want to congratulate my sister Petra genuinely, because what she did this year was hard, and she did it. I also want to be honest with the people in this yard today, because I think honesty is a gift even when it's uncomfortable, and the people here who love our family deserve accurate information. I paused. I watched my mother's face. She was holding a glass of sweet tea, and she had gone very still. For the past 8 months, since January 15th, Petra and Imani have lived in my apartment. I have provided primary childcare, meaning the overnight wakings, the pediatrician appointments, the daycare research, the emergency sick days, while working full-time as a nurse and completing a professional certification. I have done this because I love my niece, and because my family needed help, and because I believe in showing up for the people you love. A quiet had fallen over the yard. 60 people. Aunt Delphine had set her fork down. What I want people to understand is that I will not be able to continue doing this past September. Not because I don't love Imani. I love that little girl more than I can explain in a backyard speech. But because I also have a life and a career and a future that I have worked for without a village and without a safety net. And it's time for the actual plan to begin. I looked at Petra. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not betrayal. Not quite. Something more like the awestruck fear she'd had when they laid Imani on her chest. The recognition of something she hadn't prepared for. I am telling you all this publicly because the conversation has been happening privately for months, and the shape of the arrangement hasn't changed. Sometimes things need to be said in front of the people who care, because accountability requires witnesses. I looked at my father last, because his was the face I most wanted to see. I love this family. I am not going anywhere. But the nest I've been living in for the past 8 months isn't mine, and I think it's time we all figured out whose it actually is. I stepped back. Marcus started the quiet applause. Chapter 10. After the yard. The yard did not erupt. This was not a movie. What happened was quieter and, in many ways, more complete. My Aunt Delphine found me by the beverage table 20 minutes later. She was a practical woman who had worked as a school principal for 30 years, and she put her hand on my arm and said simply, "Well, that needed saying." She asked me several direct questions about Imani's situation, the logistics, the finances, Donovan's involvement, and listened to my answers with the focused attention of someone making a mental ledger. Several of my parents' church friends drifted away from Petra's orbit and came to speak to me with the particular gentle directness of older women who have watched families make the same mistakes across generations. They said things like, "You did right," and "Your grandmother would be proud." And one woman named Eloise, who had known Nanabetta personally, pressed my hand and didn't say anything at all, which was its own language. My mother did not speak to me for the rest of the party. My father found me by my car as guests were leaving and stood beside me for a moment in the driveway with his hands in his pockets. "That was a lot," he said. "It was accurate," I said. "You could have come to us privately." "I did, Dad. In April." He didn't respond to that, because there was nothing to respond with. I need Petra to have an actual plan by October 1st. A licensed childcare provider, Donovan formalized into some kind of schedule. Something that isn't me as the default. I'll help her find the resources, but I need the plan to be hers. He was quiet. Then, "You're a good person, Celeste." "I know," I said. "That's not the issue." Petra found me inside the house, in the guest bathroom, where I'd gone to wash my hands and breathe for 3 minutes. She knocked. I opened the door. We stood in the hallway. "I didn't know it was that much," she said. "I mean, I knew it was a lot, but I kept telling myself you were okay with it." "I kept telling myself that too," I said, "for a while." She had been crying. Her mascara had done the thing mascara does. She looked, again, like someone younger than her years, not in a way that excused anything, but in a way that made me understand that growth looks different in different people, and mine had happened early, by necessity, while hers was happening now, by collision. "I'm going to call Donovan tonight," she said. "For real? Not the nice call. The real one." Good, I said. Are you going to be okay with Imani until I get something set up? I looked at her. My sister. The mother of the small person who fell asleep on my collarbone and waved her arms when she heard my voice. Until October 1st, I said. And then we build it right. Chapter 11. What the months required. September was the hardest month, because it required everyone to actually do the things they had said they would do, which is always harder than saying them. Donovan arrived in Columbus on September 6th. Not for a visit. He'd ended his Charlotte contract and taken a position with a Columbus landscaping company, a decision that seemed to have been precipitated partly by Petra's real call, and partly by the fact that my father had also called him, which I learned secondhand and didn't ask about. I had no feelings about Donovan's motivations. I cared about the outcome. He came to the apartment to meet Imani. Really meet her in person over several consecutive days, not a video call. The first time he held her for an extended stretch, he sat on my couch for 2 hours with her asleep on his chest, and his face had the same undone quality that Petra's had in the delivery room. Some people have to touch the thing to believe it's real. My parents, to their credit, did something I hadn't expected. They registered as licensed kinship care providers with the county. My mother drove 40 minutes each way twice a week to pick up Imani and care for her in Westerville while Petra was in her final weeks of coursework. I did not ask them to do this. Aunt Delphine, I suspected, had said something at some point, but I didn't ask about that either. The outcome was what mattered. On September 28th, 3 days before my deadline, Petra signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in Clintonville, 3 miles from mine. Donovan's name was on the lease too. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. They were 2 people figuring out a shared responsibility, with the careful attention of people who had recently learned that inattention was expensive. But it was real. It was theirs. Imani moved out of my apartment on October 3rd, a Saturday. I helped carry things down to Petra's car. The last thing I brought down was the pack and play, folded into its bag. My second bedroom was empty. My desk came out of the closet. I stood in the doorway of the room for a long time. I missed Imani before the car had left the parking lot. I missed her so acutely it felt physical, like something had been dislodged from a place I hadn't known was holding weight. I went to Petra's apartment that first Sunday and read to Imani from a board book, and she fell asleep in my arms in Petra's living room. And when I looked up, Petra was watching me from the doorway with an expression that was mostly soft and a little ashamed and a little something I didn't have a word for. "You can come any time," Petra said. "You know that." "I know," I said. "She's going to know what you did for her. I'm going to make sure of that." I looked down at Imani's face, which was completely untroubled in the way that sleeping babies are. No hierarchy, no history, just breath. "She doesn't need to know what I did," I said. "She just needs to grow up knowing she was never not loved." Chapter 12. The professional life I'd been building in the dark. In October, I accepted the formal offer for the perinatal quality team position at St. Matthias. My nursing director, Cheryl, shook my hand in her office and said she was glad I'd stopped waiting. "You've been holding back," Cheryl said in the direct way she had. "On the committee work, on the leadership conversations, you're not holding back anymore." "No," I said, "I'm not." My parents came to Columbus for dinner in late October, just dinner, the 3 of us, at a restaurant downtown that I chose and reserved and paid for, which was a first. My mother ordered the salmon. My father ordered the ribeye. We talked about real things. Imani's first attempts at pulling herself up on furniture, my father's retirement planning, my mother's church choir. We talked about Petra's job interview at a design firm in Short North. We did not talk about the speech or the party or the arrangement, because some things don't need to be relitigated. They need to be left behind as the accounting is settled and the record is straight. Toward the end of dinner, my mother put her hand on the table, not on mine, just near it. "We put a lot on you," she said. Not her usual register. No cushioning. "You did," I said. "You handled it well." I smiled at her because I was done correcting the language. I understood what she was capable of saying, and I understood that this was her version of a larger truth she might never arrive at fully, and I could receive it for what it was. Love is sometimes spoken in a dialect you have to translate. Lorraine Whitmore's love had always been there. It had just arrived in the wrong shoes most of my life. I handled it, I said. Yes. 1 year later. A year after the graduation party, on a Saturday in August, sunny, the same kind of copper sky morning, I sat at Nana Bet's old kitchen table. Not Nana Bet's kitchen. My kitchen, in my apartment, at the table I'd bought myself the previous winter when I finally replaced the one I'd had since my first apartment after nursing school. It was a good table, solid oak, 4 chairs. I liked the weight of it. Imani was coming over at noon. She was 19 months old now, walking, careening, really, with the determined wobble of someone who had recently discovered locomotion and had not yet accepted its limits. Petra was dropping her off for the afternoon while she had lunch with someone from the design firm. A normal Saturday arrangement between 2 adults who had worked out what they could actually offer each other. My apartment was mine again, in a way it had been in theory, but not in practice for the past year. I'd painted the second bedroom a color called sea salt, a pale grayish green, and put the daybed back in there along with a bookshelf and a reading lamp. When Imani came over now, I kept a small basket of toys behind the couch, the books she liked, the stacking rings, a soft rabbit named, by Imani's inscrutable preference, Ba. I was drinking coffee, and I was reading for the first time in months without interruption, and I had been doing so since 7 a.m., which was the luxury that I still, a year later, had not stopped appreciating. On the windowsill above my kitchen sink, which faced the parking lot, same as Nana Bet's had faced the garden, I'd placed a small ceramic sparrow. It wasn't Nana Bet's. Hers had gone to my Aunt Delphine, which was right. Delphine had been there longest. Mine I'd found at an estate sale on a Sunday in November, $10, wrapped in newspaper and placed in a paper bag. It was slightly chipped on one wing, which I liked. It looked like something that had traveled. I'd bought it the week after Imani moved out, when I was learning again what my apartment sounded like without a baby in it, which is to say very quiet, and then gradually, over weeks, peaceful. A bird that lets somebody else build its nest will never know which branch to come home to. The branch I'd come home to was this, a job I'd earned and grown into, a life I'd built one careful decision at a time, a niece who waved her arms when she heard my voice, and who would grow up knowing she had never been without love, a sister who was, slowly and genuinely, becoming a person I could call a friend rather than a responsibility, parents who were, within the limits of who they were, trying to understand what they'd mistaken endurance for permission, a table with 4 chairs, a book I was halfway through, a coffee that was still hot, and a small, chipped, well-traveled sparrow on my windowsill, watching the parking lot, wings tucked, going nowhere, needing no one to show it which branch was home. Because it had built the nest itself.